Hello, MiRAA fans. We are on location at Ars Electronica in Linz, and I'm very happy today to have two legendary figures in the art and technology art world, Eduardo and Tamiko Thiel. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thanks for the invitation.
A pleasure, thank you.
I'm hoping today we can take off where we left off in Eduardo's studio in Chicago, having a great chat and a conversation that I felt we really should record and document for posterity about conservation and preservation of artwork in the digital age. And you had both talked about making artworks a long time ago and what you have done to conserve these works and whether it's possible to conserve them and preserve them, and this is the discussion that I would like you guys to pick up.
I remember we were talking about, well, at least my standpoint, that the most important thing is for the artist to record what their intent was, how the audience should perceive the work, rather than the technicalities of that. And you've had a lot of practice dealing with the technicalities of it. So I was wondering what is your central maximum to preserving your works?
Well, I subscribe to the Numjum Pike school that basically states that the technology that is embedded or hidden can be replaced with what is currently available. Having said that, I do my best to restore the works to the level of experience and dynamism and interface that gives the viewer, the current viewer, the same experience they had before. So sometimes that is possible. For example, you both saw in the studio a piece from '93 that I was able to obtain the vintage '93 computer. I installed the vintage, I managed to preserve the operating system, so I was able to install the vintage operating system. I found in a very big pile of floppies, I managed to find the one floppy that had the one file that was vintage, so that was a lot of research, but that was done. I had to open up the machine, clean it up, etc. But in any case, it's a '93 machine running a '93 operating system, running a '93 vintage piece.
Is that the Minitel?
No, that was the Mac Classic running the hypertext. But the Minitel, which a lot of people think it's a computer, as you know, is a terminal, which means that the information was not stored in the unit. The information was stored remotely, which means that you depend on an actual network to be able to make it available and retrieve. That's not possible anymore because the Minitel network doesn't exist. In that case, you can't make the entire Minitel network. So I was very meticulous. It took me 15 years to go through my archive and mobilize all the resources to recreate the work exactly, pixel by pixel, exactly as it was. But now, and the unit is vintage. It's a vintage Minitel unit, but the work now runs internally because there is no network. So in my case, it depends on the circumstance. What about VR?
Yeah, I have one piece that I finished in 2000, so it was developed in 1995 to 2000 using the virtual reality modeling language, VRML, which in those days we called virtual reality because the headsets weren't very good. So, that was running on monitors. I preferred to project it on a wall, so really wall-sized, like 9 foot by 12 foot or 3 meters by 5 meters, so that it would have an immersive feeling. And in that case, I sold that first piece that I did in VR to the San Jose Museum of Art in Silicon Valley back in 2002. And they actually were the ones who said, we're going to archive literally the entire piece, including not only the joystick and stand, which I had custom made, but also the PC it was running on. I think it was a Windows 95 PC. And so that was really a new idea for me. And I realized, well, wait a minute, of course, there's no network component, so it's really standalone on the PC. And so if they can save that piece of hardware and they don't show it that often. So if they turn it on, it should still work fine. But the interesting thing is that was 2002, the pieces from 2000. It's now, we're hitting the 20-year mark. And in that time, the VRML browser that it ran on, the company Blackstone Interactive that developed it went out of business in 2003, but another company then had developed it further. So it not only still runs, it actually runs a lot better. So just this year, actually, the Beyond MANZANAR piece is going to be shown again, starting on the 21st of September, so in a couple of weeks. And I was able to go back in the spring and visit them, and I brought them the version that I had migrated to run on Windows 10, with, of course, a lot faster processors and a lot faster graphic cards. So in this case, I told them, you've got a copy of the original version from 2002, but it never worked really the way I wanted it to. The system wasn't fast enough, so when you were turning, there was kind of this tearing happening in the image, and now it runs like butter on a hot day. And so I said, please keep that original version. It'll be easier to emulate, when they start having to really emulate the Windows system because it doesn't exist anymore. But here's the current version from this year, and they bought, bless their hearts, they bought a new laptop. It only cost like $500 at this point, And I gave them the bit management browser, which costs like 300 euros, and then the software that I had migrated over all of these years. And I was booting it up and running it, and they came in and said, "Oh my God, it looks like a film quality now." So there, I'm glad that I was able to. I'm glad I was still alive, and was able to tell them the original was at the limits of its technology, and I prefer to have it run as smoothly as possible. Now you'll have two versions. And if you have to emulate the first one, then it'll be easier than emulating the second one initially. But, the display is the important thing, and it's shown as a large projection. So there, you don't actually see the technology if you're a user. And my concern is that the image quality is as good as possible. So I'm really lucky to have that opportunity to be able to migrate it in the same museum that has, said in 2002, we will archive and preserve this, and then give them instructions on how, going forward, it should be archived in the future. So that, in general, with the virtual reality large screen projections that I've made, I want to be able to say, just make it run as smoothly as possible. But that's because there's no hardware. So you do a lot of pieces where the hardware, whether it's the Minitel or the old Mac or so, are an integral part of the whole piece, right?
But I have made also in the 90s some VRML pieces that for those pieces I produced a video recording. So that's what circulates the most now. But they are all interactive, and of course the video recording is not.
Talk to me, because I'll bet we can run it on the VRML browsers.
That would be great.
You might have to update some things, but there's a good chance.
That would be great, because I made two pieces that were kind of standalone, it's like a self-contained world. And then in '98, I created a piece that I ran experimentally in Chicago, but it really pushed the system to the limit, and I wasn't able to keep it live and running, and no institution would touch it with a 10-foot pole. And then I switched. I really started to push BioArt forward, and I would love to come back to that piece called Perhaps from '98. It's a piece that expects, hopes for 23, 24, 26 participants.
Oh, wow.
Each one with its own avatar.
Oh, wait a minute. So server-based.
Yes, but I did have an experimental server that was separate from the network, from the main genre network. So I ran it experimentally, but museums didn't understand what I was talking about, and then that was like too much to sustain, and then I moved my practice elsewhere. But I do have a video recording of that, and I have my original vector files. So it would be, and I also have my 3D files, so we could just use that, or we could reconstruct the 3D files from the vector profiles and run it on the current platform. That would be amazing.
So my husband, Peter Graff, was the server expert at Black Sun Interactive. So he grew up with Vermal. He grew up with writing servers for Vermal. I think we should talk.
That would be fun.
Yeah.
To bring that piece back.
Yeah.
I have a couple of quick questions for you. In terms of speaking to new artists and new creators, you've both done so much to inspire generations of art making. Can you talk a little bit about this meticulous archiving and record keeping that I believe is involved when you're trying to document your process so that later on, when the technology is changing, you'll still be able to recreate the feeling about something that really matters?
I think I was impressed early on. You know, I talked a lot to my grandmother, and she showed me all kinds of photographs of family, etc., and all kinds of amazing stories as a young boy. And I think that this archiving, this preservation, this ability to bring these images back to life left an impression. So when I started my career as a practicing artist, I have always been very meticulous about documentation. I was fortunate in the beginning that a very good friend of mine was a professional photographer. So for the first 6-7 years of my practice, I had the privilege of having a professional photographer document everything, and it was thanks to that I was able, for example, to bring the Minitels back, because the movement of the Minitel was given by the system. It was not given by the artist, because it's often numeric. But I was able to have photographs of every keyframe that I produced. And with the keyframe and the graph paper, you know, it's very easy to do a transposition and get the pixel position on every frame. However, the movement was tricky, because the movement, you know, we're talking about telephone system, we're talking about 33K bandwidth, and you have to recreate that, you know, analog 33K bandwidth, and push that data through, formatted in exactly the same way it was formatted back then, in a vintage unit to get the rhythm. And that took a long time to create the right conditions to make that happen. But I have always been very, very meticulous about documentation, and I may regret not having taken 1 or 2 photographs in a 40-year career, but other than that, pretty much I'm quite content with the documentation that I was able to produce.
And Tamiko, from a VR, AR perspective, do you have something to add? Because I know you have been keeping very meticulous records of how you're making
things. I started out as a product designer and mechanical engineer, so I think that's a certain type of mentality where you're a little bit more anal about things than maybe your generic artist. And also as a product design engineer, for instance, when I was working at Hewlett-Packard, you're doing all of these drawings, and you have to document everything, and you also have to talk to the production engineers about how it's supposed to be fabricated, and you have to talk to the assembly line people about how it'll be put together. And so from the beginning, I had to deal with all of this documentation, and I had to explain my product design projects to other people in order to have them built by the company. So that, I think, inculcated in me of feeling like, okay, if you build something, then you have to document it. I've gotten maybe a little bit slacking off on that as we go to having everything digital. Then those files are somewhere, but I'm not quite sure how fast I could find them all. But I think it's really that way of thinking of saying, okay, I have to be able to explain this piece to other people, and they have to be able to deal with it without me being present. So that's it's a mentality thing, and some people can do it, and some people really don't want to have to bother with it, and that's why they're artists in the first place. So it was interesting in the panel discussion when Jason Folmberg was talking about, well, we make sure that we only buy pieces that the artist has documented and is capable of documenting. Then, you know, that's certainly from the perspective of a collector, then that means, okay, I do have a chance of preserving this. And not every artist is going to want to work that way or be able to work that way.
I think this is bringing us to a new question that has to do with what type of assurances or advice can you offer to people in the art world, that it could be curators that want to collect your works, or could be collectors that want to collect your works and are worried about the technology becoming outdated, and also to art dealers who maybe for the first time want to start exhibiting your works?
Well, I think it's inevitable that anything that is made begins to decay the moment that is made. That's true of a painting, for example. Right, so ideally you will not expose the painting directly to sunlight. Ideally, you will not expose the painting to humidity. So a certain level of conservation is required, even minimally, regarding a painting. Now, when it comes to a piece of electronic art, digital art, bioart, you do have specific requirements. But from my perspective, what's the most important thing is what the viewer, the participant, experiences. And in my case, rarely, if ever, technology is visible. Technology is always there as a means of enabling a sensorial experience for the viewer, for the participant. And that can be replaced with what's currently available if necessary. I have provided, when requested, meticulous documentation about everything, in a high level of detail, which is the case of the Thomas Foundation, MoMA, Tate. They all have requested an enormous amount of information. And in addition to what you provide in writing, there are also the interviews in which you discuss aspects of how the work was restored or produced, and possibilities of conservation moving forward. In some cases, I have even provided additional technical components for replacement in the future when it's appropriate. So I think you take it case by case, but it's no different than, say, for example, in the 60s and 70s, many artists made ephemeral works that were conceptual. Those works may not have a physical existence. They may have a protocol that has to be reproduced. So I think there is precedent in the art world for works that involve a certain level of material and physical engagement on the part of conservators.
Tamiko?
I would first off start off by really underlining what Eduardo said, that it's about the user experience, and that it's about the artist writing down how the user ideally would perceive the experience, would encounter the experience. And then in terms of virtual reality and augmented reality, you know, part of the discussion with Whitney Museum about the unexpected growth piece that they commissioned, and now thanks to you, we're donating to them, is Christiana Paul asked me, outline how you would conserve the piece, how should we archive the piece. So I wrote down this whole strategy about, okay, we need to describe the experience that they're supposed to have, and then you can deconstruct the piece into its component assets, and there's image files, there's 3D models, there's sound files, and those have to be migrated, although they have a fairly long life actually. And once you migrate those, then the question is, how are they put together? And of course, that's part of the Unity system that we use to create the work. It's part of the scripts that we use to create the work. But that can also be described at a high level in terms of, for instance, well, it reads the position of the user and then make sure that the augments stay within an area about 20 meters by 10 meters around the user, even when they're walking around, etc. So there can be a description of sort of the sensory experience of the user encountering it, and then a high-level description of any sort of technical moves that you have to do that would be, if you make the description good enough, then it can be then reproduced in any programming language. It doesn't have to be in the language that we're using now. If it happens in 100 years, those languages might not exist. But the other thing is also that you have a version, a standalone version that runs on a smartphone that is not doesn't have to be connected to the internet, so that there you have a standalone experience where you can archive that phone, and it has to be prevented from updating itself because that'll destroy everything. But if you do keep it off the internet, take the chip out, then that will provide also the same experience, even if if the carriers change or whatever. And that plus all of the information will give them all the source code, can be used to then emulate the system if need be further down the road. So it's a complete package of looking at it from several different ways, and that is also the sort of basic information that would be needed to conserve any of my AR works. So once we finally get down and dirty and do all of that for the Whitney, then I've got this whole package, and it can be adapted to other artworks. And I'm hoping also that if other people buy the other editions of that work, they can go to the Whitney and say, I'm having trouble running this. Can I talk with your staff? Because the Whitney is more of a conservation department than a private collector would have, for instance. And I know also I don't know what the current state is, but for decades there's been discussions among different organizations, media art organizations, and museums with media art collections about working together to help each other, because why should 10 institutions emulate a Windows system? Why not work together, emulate it once, everyone shares it? I don't know what that status is, but that's obviously the way it should go.
Well, unfortunately, I could stay and listen to you guys talking for a very long time, but that's all the time we have for today. But thank you both so much for joining us.
And thanks for doing this interview.
Thank you very much.